Hey guys, and welcome back to the Curious Curators. I'm Hope.
And I'm Lindsay.
And today we are going to talk about mummies. I actually have enjoyed mummies since I saw the movie, but we know that's not accurate, so... historically accurate movies. The Mummy.
The Mummy.
So we are just going to talk a little bit about mummies today. I think that mummies are pretty popular to a lot of people.
In pop culture, yes.
Yes. Like, people are interested in mummies.
Not necessarily how many mummies exist.
I'm sure that I could not tell you. So
I don't think I don't think they're very numerous.
no.
But as far as people's interests in them, I think.
Yeah. I remember, off topic, I remember years and years ago watching Are You Afraid of the Dark? And there's a mummy episode, and I thought that one was so scary.
I definitely got scared from Are You Afraid of the Dark
Same.
a couple of times.
Probably still today if I were to watch it.
I'll have to look back and watch it and see how scary it is to a much older me.
Horrifying, probably. It's all on YouTube. So
Great.
all right, so mummies are humans or animals, basically, and they have been preserved with a chemical solution, usually, even though there are some, like, accidental mummies.
Right. So they could be dried or otherwise preserved after death.
Right. And sometimes
Environmental.
yes, conditions are the reason that
Yeah,
things
there's
are mummified.
purposeful mummification, then there's accidental mummification. And I think we're going to review both instances.
Yeah. And I didn't actually know this. It surprised me a little bit. But mummies of humans and animals have been found on, like, every continent. So I assume...
Except Antarctica,
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's
That's
I'm
usually
assuming.
what they say is every continent but Antarctica.
Yeah, because... Well, I don't know. Maybe, like, a polar bear or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I did write down examples from just about everywhere because I wrote down known cultures that purposefully created mummies.
And then a lot of cultures.
And then we have some accidental ones.
I think accidental ones are pretty popular in, like, Europe and stuff. They just sort of happen.
Asia is actually
Oh, okay.
the most popular for, like,
Are
accidental
they?
mummies, I think.
All
Yeah.
right.
So I wrote down that most mummies in Asia are considered accidental mummies.
Okay.
But purposeful cultures that have created mummies are ancient Egyptians, Christians, mummifying saints.
Yes, mummified hands and whatnot.
I'm apologize for this, but possibly Ko'in in South Africa.
Okay.
There's a Libyan example. You have the bog bodies in northern and western Europe. You have the Guanche people of the Canary Islands. You have the Aztecs, Aboriginal Australians, the Maori, Chinchorro, Chile, the Incan, and self-mummified Buddhist monks.
Oh, yeah. That still kind of goes on today, doesn't
Yes.
it? Oh, let's see.
And
now.
even good old Vladimir Lenin is...
Oh, yes. So there are some...
There are modern
displayed
mummies.
mummies. Yeah, modern mummies. Who was it in South America? She was the wife of, like, a president or something, and she was basically, like,
Oh, yeah.
embalmed for show purposes.
Don't ask me things that aren't in my notes, because I cram for the podcasts, and then I forget every other little bit of information I have.
Well, I think we could probably say, and I could be wrong, but I think some of the most well-known mummies are Egyptian mummies.
Absolutely. That was actually the first set of notes I wrote.
Like, they're
was Egyptian.
very well-known. And not just people, but also cats,
Yes.
ibises, like, so birds, and
Baboons, crocodiles, and also bulls.
okay, so that's something. I know we said in our cat podcast that you could bring your cat to a special, like, cat mummification burial ground.
Yep.
And, like, yes to the cats.
It was a little
But-
pricey, though. Mummification was a little bit pricey.
Yeah, I actually saw that Herodotus, who is a Greek
Yeah.
writer, kind of wrote about a lot of different, like, mummification practices, which I thought was interesting that he would be the one to write it all down, but, you know, neither here nor there. He wrote a lot of things, and basically you could have, like, that upper echelon of, like, echelon of... Lindsay always has to correct my English pronunciation because I'm really bad.
I try not
at-
to unless you ask.
Yeah, my confused look usually. But it was like you could do this whole thing, or then there was like a second tier or even like a third if you couldn't afford like a full mummification ritual.
Yeah, so in Egypt it was mostly pharaohs, but also nobles, officials, and the common people who could afford the process.
Right. So that's why we kind of come across a lot of Egyptian mummies.
Yeah.
I say a lot, that's kind of relative, but, more than...
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like we're coming across, like, a mummy a day or something.
Well, actually, the real reason that we come across a lot was because mummification was important in their religion.
Right. This is a sense of mummification for religious purposes.
Yes. So they believed that the body housed the soul, and so you had to keep it as lifelike as possible. Because if you let it deteriorate or go away, the soul is going to die.
Okay. And you would need your soul in the underworld after you died. I know that there are multiple books about the process, what's going to happen in the afterlife, all of that.
Yeah, Book of the Dead, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so you needed to have a well-preserved body to house your soul or your spirit, essentially.
I feel that.
But the earliest mummies in Egypt were probably accidental. So intentional mummification probably happened around 2600 BCE. And from what I researched, the mummification took up to 70 days.
Yeah, they would leave you in a type of salt for, like, so very long.
Well, after they removed all of your internal organs.
Yes, and washed you with, like, myrrh
and
spices.
I always thought they put a straw up your nose and sucked it out, but actually they put a hook up your nose. And took little bits of brain tissue out at a time through your nose, because you had to be careful because you could destroy the face that way.
Because you couldn't, my thought process would be you couldn't cut the head, because then in your afterlife you would have the incisions.
Well, it was more a fact of preservation, and they also didn't want your face to collapse in on itself. So they would also stuff all the empty area with linen.
To keep your whole form.
Yes. I guess
any
part that they removed because they didn't want you to sink in on yourself, and they also gave you false eyes.
Okay, so you could see.
Yes.
In a way it all makes sense. So by the time of like Cleopatra, let's say, was this practice gone?
It continued into the Roman period until about 364 CE.
So was Cleopatra mummified?
I don't know.
I don't either. But I remember, like, it wasn't Alexander the Great. He was mummified. And they've since lost his mummy.
Yeah.
But he was mummified. And, I mean, that was a long time apart. I was just thinking of people that I knew of off the top of my head. So into the Roman period. And then I guess, did Egyptians end up taking up Roman gods? I didn't look that up.
I didn't look that up. I said, don't ask me anything that's not on my notes.
I should have, yes. But I don't know. I think it's super interesting, like, the trouble that people went to preserve, like, their bodies and everything. I think that's so interesting.
Well, because it was important.
Yeah.
Like, you want these people to have their souls.
Yeah. I mean, just like a funeral. It was very important, and that it astounds me because it's such a process. Like 70 days, that's over 2 months that it takes. So, like, you wouldn't have your funeral for 2 to 3 months.
Well, if you're a pharaoh, you probably have your funeral the entire time.
Yeah, true. And then they would just put you in the tomb. I don't know, it's so interesting to me. So Lindsay also mentioned earlier that Christian saints are mummified. And usually it's not their whole bodies, but like pieces of their bodies. I know some churches will have like the hand of a saint.
Have you ever seen one?
A saint's relic? I saw a skull, but not a mummified thing. What about you?
No, I just knew that you had done some traveling in Europe.
In Greece, I saw the skull of Panagia Evangelistria. On the island of Tinos, maybe. And it is I guess you could call it a shrine, but it's also a pilgrimage site. So you come up to the side of the island and then go on your knees the mile to the church. And
did you do that? No. Okay, I was just curious.
No. There's a runner type thing, but no, we walked. And there's inside the church, You can't take photos, but there's a box, and in the box you could see the top of her skull.
Oh.
Yeah. She had holy visions. So, but that is, I think they said in St. Peter's Basilica, there's something underneath the altar, some part of St. Peter, but the lion's skin to St. Peter's Basilica is...
Yeah, I hear a lot of mummified body parts that make their way around to different churches and things like that, but I've never seen one.
I think when we were talking about St. Nicholas, I think part of him, some sort of mummified something or bone or something.
It is hands a lot.
Yeah, is in a church in Italy.
Okay.
But some like a sailory type church.
Hands and fingers a lot.
Yeah, I guess it's easy to lop those off.
Well, and I suppose those would be somewhat holier parts of you because you touch people and you bless. Like that's a very, you bless people with your hands.
Yeah, that's very true. Huh. I don't know. I've never I have to wonder if, like, you know how sometimes they don't show you the relics because...
But they say they have it?
Yeah. So I always wonder, do you still have it? Does anyone know if you still have it? Is it, like, in a box,
Is it one of those situations where you did have it, but you can't tell people that you don't have it anymore because you don't know what happened to it?
Or you destroyed it?
Because that happened at one point. There was and it was... I wish I'd written this down, but there was a church who used to have it, and they kept saying they had it, but it showed up somewhere else. But they did have it at one point.
But they didn't want to say,
But I think there was a fire, and they said that they had saved it, but it was damaged, so they kept it away, but it showed up somewhere else.
Because, like, someone spirited it from...
Yes.
I also wonder, like, opening, if it's, I'm sure it's held in something, but opening and closing stuff and like people touching it, like, you can destroy things. And so now do you have the dust of a mummy, or I don't know.
Well, I guess if you have dust, you can share it much easier. I wonder if that's what happens to the fingers, like, of hands. You know, that's how people get fingers, is it's like, well, we could either have 2 people have this relic,
or we could have
10.
Plus the hands themselves, I think, isn't there like something, someone has an ear somewhere or something?
I think
like
you're
that?
right. An ear is one of them.
But I don't know, I guess, that's not personally something I would steal. Like, I would never, because, you know, they don't want anyone to steal it, but I would never be like,
I wouldn't steal a dead body part.
A mummified ear. Like, I can't wait to have this in my house. Ew, no.
No, that would,
so I don't,
that's not it.
I think it's, I don't know. Anyway, moving on, there are mummified saints. If you work somewhere and have seen one, you let us know, because we are determined to know if this is real now. I'm gonna look it up, Vatican.org. not that they are the only ones that keep things like that. It just seems like
certain churches and things like that preserve the mummified saint remains.
It's probably in the Vatican archives.
But I think the interesting thing about the mummified saints is most people think about mummies as being an ancient thing or being Egyptian, or sometimes they might think of other places like Peru.
Yeah.
But they're not thinking of Christian saints being mummified.
And like, you have to consider, like, sometimes people are canonized all the time. So I mean, like, we're talking like you could be canonized next year. Probably not one of us personally, but someone. And then, well, I mean, what could you, like, on your deathbed be like, cut off my hand, mummify it, and we just going to keep it as a relic? That's weird. But I mean, like, conceivably, I guess you could do that. Please don't ever do that. That's really strange, but I guess you could. We don't really kill people in order to make them saints anymore, like martyrs.
Right.
So maybe,
I would hope not.
Maybe not. So, in China?
Yeah, Xin Shui.
Yes.
Shui.
Yes.
She died at 50 years old.
Okay.
Possibly in the summer of 168 BCE. They think she might have died in the summer because she had like 50 melon eggs or melon seeds. I mean, I guess they are kind of melon eggs because they create melons. Melon seeds in her stomach.
Okay.
And melons are a seasonal fruit, so they doubt that she would have eaten them in the winter.
Right.
Apparently she had internal parasites, coronary thrombosis, and she even had like blood still in her veins, arteriosclerosis, excessive weight gain, a fused spinal disc, and gallstones. And
So she was real healthy then.
Oh, yeah. I can't believe she made it to 50, to be honest.
Yeah.
And she was well preserved with an unknown fluid inside the coffin. And her skin was soft and moist. And her muscles were still flexible.
They autopsied her. Like, could actually... I find it so very interesting just how much you can learn from, like, mummies and stuff. But that's like a person. Like, that's not a mummy. It is a mummy, but it's also like that's a person. It doesn't look like what we think of a mummy. Like, that's a person.
Yeah, if you look up pictures, she's pretty horrifying.
Yeah. I saw one of her autopsy and I was like, not pleasant. But so was it the fluid in her coffin that made her a mummy? Can they test on those fluids now to see like what they are?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you can test on anything now.
I think I read about what it was, but I didn't write it down.
It's very sciencey.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think there's so much just like everywhere, isn't it? In like Siberia and stuff, the ice, because Siberia is literally like a frozen tundra.
Yeah.
And that just like preserves you completely as well. But then is that an issue when you come out of that cold environment?
Yes,
like,
you
very
will deteriorate.
fast deterioration.
You have to pretty much remain in that temperature to keep the preservation.
And I think in some parts of Siberia it can be like negative 134 degrees.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like the coldest place in the world is there. So that's insane to me.
Yeah, so in icy places you had like the Canadian Iceman.
Oh yeah, and Otzi.
The Iceman.
Yes.
The Canadian Iceman was frozen about 300 to 500 years ago. He was around 18 to 19 years old.
So quite young.
Possibly died of hypothermia. He had apparently traveled 62 miles in the 3 days preceding his death based on what he'd eaten.
Wow.
And to be quite honest, that's a lot more in 3 days than I do in a month.
Same.
So... but he had a robe made of 95 pelts from Arctic ground squirrels.
Well.
But Otzi the Iceman was found, and obviously the Canadian Iceman was found in Canada. Otzi the Iceman was found in the Ötztal Alps between Austria and Italy.
He's the first, mummified person that wasn't an Egyptian mummy. I vividly remember in 6th grade, we did world history, which I think is still like a thing. They still do world history in 6th grade. And our textbook had a picture of him, and I was that kid that always read ahead. Yeah. Because I was really interested in history. And I turned the page, and it was a picture of him, and I was like, this is scary. Like, I was like, what? So, of course, I read ahead, but I vividly remember learning about him a good 17 years ago.
Yeah, I think they believed he was from around 3,400 BCE.
And they think he was murdered, don't they?
Yes.
Yes. So he is a very old murder victim.
Yes, they found an arrowhead in his shoulder, and they think he might have bled to death.
Oh, like weakened and then couldn't get out of the snow and just bled out. How sad. He is like, it's, wow. So you can find 1,000-plus-year-old murder victims.
And his tattoos were intact. He had 61 tattoos.
They were almost bluish looking, or when we saw them, they were almost bluish looking.
They were hard to see, actually. Oh. They were really hard to see. People didn't know what they were at first. Do you want to know a fun fact about him?
Yes.
He was lactose intolerant.
Was he? Oh, okay. I'm reading a book right now, and it's about that, and it basically was talking about how...
It's about lactose intolerance.
Well, it was talking about just people in general and how the reason that people became lactose intolerant was because they lived in groups, not having to drink from animals because they could drink alcohol.
Oh. Well, he was lactose intolerant. They either think he was a shepherd or he worked in smelting copper.
Those are very different professions.
Yeah, so he had high levels of copper and arsenic in his hair, but his bones had evidence of being highly mobile, like more than the average person of the time period.
Okay.
So either he was like a traveling copper smelter or he was a shepherd.
That's so interesting that they're so
I'm
spread
thinking
out.
he was probably a shepherd because he was found in the mountains. And they spend a
Yeah.
lot of time alone. It would make sense for somebody to be a murder victim just out in the mountains
you're an
with
easy
your sheep.
target. And your sheep aren't going to help you.
But maybe he grew up with like a copper smelting family. I don't know.
Or he spent time like in a town and like that's where he slept or something. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of probability there, clearly. But
Yeah.
that's so I love it when they're like, he was either a banker or a professional football player.
Yeah,
Who
it's
knows? Okay, thank you.
There was another one found, frozen bodies in Kilakisak, and I apologize for my Inuktitut speaking viewers, of which there are none. That's Greenland. There was a tomb dated to about 1475 with people stacked on top of each other. So the first grave had 3 women stacked on top of each other with a little boy on top of them and a baby on top of that. And I sent you the picture of the baby.
Yes, she did. It was nice and horrifying.
And the second grave had 3 women piled on top of each other, and there were rocks on top of them. So it was purposeful. Like people had piled rocks on the pits. And most of them are related to each other in some way.
Okay.
And the 4-year-old boy may have had Down syndrome. He has some physical evidence of having Down syndrome.
Can they test these bodies for disease? Like, could it have been a plague or something that wiped out?
Yeah,
the whole
they can
family?
do that. The present state of Greenlandic archaeology is not like as well funded as Egyptian archaeology.
Right.
But they did test DNA, and they were able to find that there were basically 3 sets of familial DNA. So the baby and 2 of the women were related, and the little boy and 2 of the women were related, and 1 woman was not related to any of them. And they were basically freeze-dried where they were. So some of the women had actually decayed, but some of the women were freeze-dried.
Okay.
So like the people on top were freeze-dried, and the people on bottom eventually decayed.
Oh, because...
Probably because it was warmer,
Yeah, 'cause
deeper
you
in
would
the...
have
You wouldn't have the
things
permafrost.
That's so interesting. So that was accidental, we're thinking.
Yes.
But they buried them with the rocks on top, but then it was accidental that they mummified.
Yes. And the same with the Siberian Ice Maiden, who was a part of the Pazyryk culture in the Altai Mountains in Siberia.
Which is in Russia.
So she was carefully preserved, but it seemed like the mummification of her, the freezing, was an accident. It apparently rained and flooded her tomb and froze her. But she, it was a rare example of a single woman with full ceremonial garb. Like she had a huge hat and she had a wig and she had all kinds of...
Someone important.
Yeah, they think either she was a ruler of some kind or a high priestess, based on all of the stuff she had with her. She also had really well-preserved tattoos.
Oh, yeah, she's the one that you can just see them. Like, they're on her arms and they're everywhere.
They found a man similarly about 2 years later. His cause of death is unknown. I don't know if her cause of death is known. I didn't write it down, but his is unknown. And they were accidentally mummified.
Yeah.
Because of freezing rain.
Right.
That froze, and then it stayed frozen because of the permafrost.
Right, so it just never thawed out. And
Yeah.
I always have a lot of respect for people that are able to find things in a literal frozen wasteland, because, like, wouldn't you just want to be at home?
Yeah.
Like, could you imagine if someone was like, all right, Lindsay, well, I have an archaeological dig that I want you to go on. I want you to lead it, blah, blah, blah. It's in Siberia, and the average temperature is, like, negative 80.
You know, I'd probably do it for the right amount of money.
Right. Well, yeah, but you'd still complain about it.
Yes, I would.
There is not a parka warm enough.
There is not.
But I don't know. I find that so interesting. And I think it's really interesting that they can also find the cause of death for a lot of these people.
Them, yeah.
Like, I know when I talk about some bog bodies, like, you could, like, the
You
cause
can
of
tell.
death is there. And it's so, like, interesting that, like, so long ago, some of these people are murdered, some of them die of natural causes,
Yeah.
whatever. But you can still tell. And I'm like, That is so cool. That astounds me. Also, the facial reconstructions they can do of all of them.
What I think is coolest about some of these mummies is like the hairstyles.
Oh yeah.
Like I went down a rabbit hole when I was looking at bog bodies, like looking at all of the hairstyles,
facial reconstructions. I was so interested.
I was into the hairstyles. I was like, man, can I do some of those hairstyles? Because it's like these are Viking bodies that were buried.
Yeah.
I'm like, these do not look like the Vikings TV show.
No, I saw one girl and they reconstructed her outfit, and it was like a crop top and like a skirt, and it had like a, not necessarily a halter, but there was like, and I was like, people would wear that today.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting. It kills me. I'm always so interested. But because they can do like all the scans on everything, and they can, autopsy some of them, but they can do all the CAT scans, they can do all the facial, and I'm like, that's so insane that you can look at what people looked like. Yeah. Like actual people's faces from longer ago than you can even fathom. Yeah. I think it blows my mind, like, completely. Do you want to do bog bodies or Peru?
Bog bodies will work. I've got even more than Peru. I went down a rabbit hole.
I knew you would know a lot about that anyway, so I was like. So I did some research into the bog bodies, as we keep mentioning, because I think they're interesting. So a lot of them have names, but they're called like something. No, they're called like. Hold on, I have one I wrote down. Okay,
like the Torvald man or something.
Yeah, and like Kolbjerg man, who's like from Denmark, or there was Cashel man, who's from Ireland. They're named after where they're found.
Right. I think Pete is better.
Right. So
this is Steve.
I know, Steve, the bog body. So basically, bog bodies are bodies that are naturally mummified in a bog, but it's because of the chemical composition of a bog. I mean, like, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it, but to me, because I'm not a scientist, but basically, these are everywhere that you get peat bogs. And it's really only peat bogs. And these are found like dating between 8,000 BCE and World War II. And I'm sure that you could
I read about the World War II, like Soviet
the soldiers
in the Soviet Union,
yeah. So, I mean, you could probably, I would not be surprised if they still find like murder victims thrown in a bog. I had to look up what a bog looked like because I was picturing like a swampy type thing. Yeah. It's kind of a field with some standing water. Okay. So I was like, okay, like you must fall into that quite easily, but whatever. So some of these are
if you're murdered, you fall into it quite easily.
Or human sacrificed. So basically,
that's murder.
Some are going to be preserved. Some of them are kind of like skeletons, and it just kind of varies. But the thing about bog bodies is they can keep their skin and their internal organs. It just makes their skin really, really, really dark. The reason that this happens is a combination of highly acidic water, low temperature, and a lack of oxygen, and that kind of just preserves really quickly.
It like tans them like leather.
Yes. So if you see bog bodies, their skin is very, very, like, literally like the color
I'm sure they
of my
smell
jacket.
lovely too.
I imagine that
just like a tannery.
I imagine a peat bog stinks anyway.
I don't know how many peat bogs I've been around.
I don't think I've ever seen, because they keep talking about it in like Ireland and stuff, and like literally never even, no one was like, there's a bog over there. No one. But then again, who knows? So the oldest one, please pardon me, is the Kolbjerg man from Denmark. So he dates to about 8,000 BCE. 800,000 is what I was gonna say. And
from the Mesolithic area.
Yes,
Mesolithic.
Mesolithic, I think.
Mesolithic.
And the oldest fleshed bog body is the Cashel man. Again, if that's wrong, I'm very sorry. That looks like how I've noticed that they emphasize different syllables than I would. Right. So I don't know if Cashel is right.
Or if it would be Cashel.
Yeah, or Kasha. I have no idea. Okay. And he's from the Bronze Age, about 2000 BCE. And we're talking about, like, there's so many of them.
I think most of them came from the Iron Age.
Yes, most of them did. And they're found in like northwest Europe a lot. So we're talking like
Probably
Denmark,
where the peat bogs
Germany.
are.
Yeah. If you don't know where all the peat bogs are, which I don't. I actually read a book about a bog. There was a bog in it the other day. I always say, oh my gosh, I read a book.
There's a bog near my house. It's just standing water all year round.
Yeah, I think there can be.
But there's still like grass growing in it.
I could be wrong, but I think there can also be like kind of underground like rivers and stuff underneath them, so you can get like stuck and caught
We did
up.
not do our research on bogs.
I mean, I looked at a Wikipedia page on bogs, but like it wasn't something that was really like
Next curator tracks, we go find a bog.
a peat bog. We'll see you in the UK. So the Cashel Man, who I found him kind of interesting. So he is from the Colnamona, again, my deepest apologies, bog near Cashel in County Laos, Ireland, and he was found in 2011. And I kind of mentioned this to you earlier. This guy was like mowing the grass and came across him.
Oh, yeah.
And I would have just died. But this guy is pretty young, about 20 to 25, and he was intentionally covered with peat after his death. And he was found like crouched. Sorry, the guy was milling, not cutting grass. I think that's the same thing. But he had a pre-mortem broken arm that was caused by a strike with a sharp object. His back was broken in 2 places, and there was like a cut on his back, but that could have been from the peat harvester. They're not sure.
Oh, okay.
So it was also...
What do you harvest peat for?
I have no idea. Fires?
We didn't do our research on peat bogs.
That's a whole podcast on peat bogs at this point.
Next, to make up for this, we'll do a whole podcast on peat bogs.
On peat bogs, and you all have to listen. So this is common in some bog bodies. This was found with his too. Wooden stakes, which make them think that it's a ritual sacrifice because they could hold you down. And I thought this was interesting. The guy may have been a king, and he was sacrificed due to poor harvests because they would often do that. They thought the king was responsible, so they would sacrifice him and pick another one.
That's pretty common around the world.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm not a king. Well, I mean, I'm really not, but whatever. So I'm not glad.
I mean, the last time we talked should have made you glad not to be king.
Yeah, well, it never does, really. So I did see that one archaeologist, his name is P.V. Glob, he believed that these bodies and some things that are found with them, neck rings, wristlets, ankle rings made of bronze, sometimes gold, were offerings to the gods of fertility and fortune. And they're thinking that these bodies were too. They were praying to the gods. A lot of them have signs of being stabbed, bludgeoned, hanged, strangled. There was one guy, the Osterby man. He was found near Osterby, Germany in 1948. His head was there without his body. So beheaded maybe? So like they find like a lot.
I mean, he would have been beheaded at some point.
Yeah. And they are usually naked when they go in. But also, so I'm kind of thinking it could be like murder or it could be sacrifice. But if you murder someone, you could just grab their clothes and take them anyway. So I think it could kind of be either one. But a lot of times they think the clothing may have decomposed. Sometimes they think they weren't wearing it. And a lot of times things are placed on top of the bodies in order to like hold them down, and some of them even show signs of torture. But now a lot of times the broken bones and everything, now they're thinking that the weight of the bog itself is actually what is breaking bones and like crushing skulls and everything. So they're like, maybe it wasn't like that, maybe it's just from all of this.
One of the signs of torture that they had was like cuts in the skin.
Yeah, there was one guy, it was like cut right under his breastbone.
Yeah, like purposeful cuts in the skin. Like it's not like a peat farmer
accidentally cut you. They were also saying that maybe, I did read this, maybe they cut them open and pulled their organs out.
Oh yeah, for divination purposes.
Yeah, and I was like, oh gosh. But I know one guy was found with a rope still around his neck. And then, but there are some, like the Grauballe man, and they've determined using CT scans and everything that he was actually crushed by the bog, not by torture. So as they find out more, I think things are changing, but they find a lot of these. And I think that also they can kind of go to the same place and they don't see anything, and then they go back and they find like them. So I think that's, Lindsay also mentioned, there was like a bunch of soldiers that got stuck in a bog in
the Soviet Union.
Yeah, so like I would assume, and I could be very wrong because you know what assuming does, but if you walked out into a bog and got stuck, and it would just eventually pull you under, like quicksandish, or you would fall and get buried in it.
Or they got killed in the bog field.
Yeah, like I guess it could be anything. But
if it was a battleground.
True. If it was a battleground, you would just, and I guess you would eventually sink because there's water.
And nobody was going to go retrieve you from a bog.
No.
They probably couldn't see you.
True. Or they were like, I'm not going to get stuck out there too.
Yeah, or this is Russia. I'm not going out into that cold water to get your body.
We mentioned Russia a lot in this Mummies podcast, but like, Russia's big. A lot of stuff can happen there.
Well, and Siberia is a good place to freeze bodies.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, if you're looking at like the size of like, Liechtenstein versus the size of Russia, like clearly we're gonna have a lot of different temperatures around Russia that we can talk about. But yeah, I think bog bodies are really interesting, and I made a note. They also do facial reconstructions, which I've mentioned 12 times. So if you hadn't heard it before, they do facial reconstructions on them. And hairstyle reconstruction.
Oh yeah, those are cool. I watched tutorials on how to do bog body hairstyles.
Oh, but why didn't you do it today?
Oh, dang it!
I know. Like we haven't
Missed
just been
opportunity.
So busy running around today. Like God, you should have done your hair.
Anyways, I'm gonna go in order of the stuff I have because I have something before Peru.
Oh, I'm just so all over the place. So.
So something else, I mentioned the Maori were one of the ones. They had Moche. So they were basically the preserved heads of Maori that had Moche tattoos, which are a bunch of face tattoos. And they were indicators of status. And basically how they did this was they would remove the brain and the eyes, and they would seal all of the orifices, and then they would steam or boil it. Then they would smoke it, and then they would dry it in the sun, and then it was treated with shark oil. And basically, there were two reasons to do this. Either families would keep the heads in boxes and like bring them out on holidays or for ceremonies, or it was done to enemy chiefs, and you would put it out, and people would mock it. But once they made contact with Europeans, this actually became like a trade for curios in museums.
Oh, I
in exchange for firearms and ammunition. So each tribe wanted firearms and ammunition now that it was introduced because it gave you a leg up on other ones.
Right.
And the Europeans were so fascinated with these heads.
Is that what they call like shrunken heads?
Shrunken heads are actually different, but essentially in the same vein. Shrunken heads are from South America.
Okay.
These were not shrunken.
So do they still have these heads in museums now?
Yes.
No repatriation, I assume?
They are trying to get one of the collections repatriated back to the Maori, but...
We are for repatriation,
yes.
by the way. So.
And that's... I think it's the largest collection of them as well. I think it's a private collection, and they are not being currently repatriated.
That frustrates me.
So let's travel to South America.
That's my dream, so let's.
So the oldest artificially preserved mummies were actually 2,000 years before the Egyptians.
Okay.
And that was in 5050 BCE, based on radiocarbon dating, by the Chinchorro people. I believe they are of northern Chile.
Okay.
So they mummified, they're different from everyone else because they mummified all members of society. A lot of times purposeful mummification was done to people of status to preserve them, but this was actually done to everyone. And children and babies received the most elaborate treatment of mummification. Also very odd, because usually it was rulers who were adults. You know? So the the earliest naturally mummified Chinchorro mummy is from 2,000 years even before that. But what they did is they would remove the internal organs, replace it with vegetable fibers and hair. In some cases, they would replace the skin and the flesh with clay. And if you see those, they're really uncanny. And they actually did this for a couple thousand years until 1800 BCE. And it actually revealed the oldest evidence of tattooing in the Americas around 1880 BCE. So that's kind of the start of South American mummification, we believe, that we've discovered so far.
Right, and I think there's so much of South America that we haven't.
You know, like the Amazon, where there are tribes that still have not been contacted.
Yeah, well, and even like the mountains that are just like so high and so cold, and like people just don't have time to explore them. So we could find so much more in South America, but that's old. That's very old.
I'm going to move on to the Moche and then the Inca because I'm doing it chronologically through South America.
Perfect.
So the Moche are pre-Inca, and this one I just want to talk about one specific example because I saw this one. When I was in Peru, I went to see the Lady of Sao. And she was possibly a ruler or a high-ranking priestess. She was in her mid-20s. They believe she died due to complications in pregnancy or childbirth based on examination of the body. She was buried with weapons and wrapped in many layers of cloth, and she was also heavily tattooed. So I actually got to see the museum where they housed her, and it was like a dark room, and everything was all black, and then you would walk into this separate room, and it had like a motion sensor light, so that the light wasn't on her unless somebody was looking at her.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And they do recreations with her, like her outfit and everything. It's just laden with gold.
Oh, gosh.
It's like this big tunic that goes down to her shins, and it's just
gold.
Yeah. But the Incas mostly had naturally preserved ice mummies. So I think I wrote about specific mummies, and I'm trying to think of the processes that went into it. It was a lot of times it was children.
Right.
It was mostly children, I believe. I don't think I even have an adult listed on here.
Were they sacrifices then?
Yes. So they would bring these, they knew they would be sacrifices.
Right.
And they brought them to basically the capital, where they would be like force-fed chicha, which is a type of alcoholic beverage, and coca leaves, which is where you get cocaine from.
Yeah.
So they would be plowed with alcohol and drugs, and treated to good meals and things like that. So we can tell these things from dentition and bones. You know, you can actually look at dental structure to know their diets.
Oh, yeah.
And you can also look at the contents of their stomach because they're so well preserved.
Yeah.
So they were brought, it's believed they were brought to Cusco, and they were kind of plied with good food and alcohol and drugs, essentially. Except coca leaves, if you chew on them, they're a stimulant.
Right.
They're not really... I had coca tea while I was there.
Yeah, because it's common.
It's kind of like caffeine.
Yeah. Could they have made it differently? Could they have?
Yeah.
I mean, they could have basically processed it into cocaine, right?
I don't think they had the processes to do that.
I don't know how.
I don't know a lot about how to process cocaine. I just
watched
know that
Narcos once, but that's all I know.
I just know when I was there, like a lot of the mountaineers and guides would chew on coca leaves. I didn't want to chew on them at all because it
they stain
rots your teeth and your gums, and I didn't, like, not even once. I really care about my teeth.
Same, yeah, no. When I was looking at, because like we all know my dream is to hike Machu Picchu, here we are. So they were saying like bring coca leaf tea, bring coca leaves, do something because like the altitude sickness is brutal. Yeah. And it's supposed to be a cure for altitude sickness as well.
Oh. So one of them was the Plomo Mummy, and he was an 8-year-old boy. He was basically force-fed chicha and coca leaves until he vomited. Like, they have evidence of it on his lips and on his clothes.
Oh, wow.
And he was buried alive, probably heavily sedated.
By the coca leaves and alcohol.
Yes. And his skin was painted with red ochre. His hair was braided into like 200 tiny, tiny braids.
Oh my goodness.
And they believe that, and he was basically left in the mountains to die. And that was kind of to appease the deities in the mountains, to stop natural disasters or famine or things like that. Another one is the Mummy Juanita. She was a 12 to 15-year-old girl, and she was killed as an offering to the gods. Also had chicha and coca leaves. And they actually got that from her hair, based on markers in her hair. And she was killed by blunt force trauma. And basically this whole thing, and I'm going to talk about one more example, is a practice called capachocha, or capacocha, where children are selected for sacrifice and brought to Cusco, plied with food, alcohol, drugs, and then taken to a sacred space in the mountains and killed there, usually via blunt force trauma to the head, suffocation, or being buried alive, or strangulation. So one of the most famous ones is the Children of Yu Yayako, and it was 3 children. All were drugged and left to die in this small chamber that was about 5 feet below the ground. And they all died in their sleep. Like, they were plied completely until they fell asleep.
Well, that's probably why the combination, though, because that can kill you by itself. The combination of a stimulant and a depressant can make
they
your heart
basically plied you until you slept. Like, these are children, so you think this is cruelty, this is awful. Like, but the reason that children were used is because children were so precious,
right?
That they would appease the deities better than an adult.
Yeah.
They had more life left to give, essentially. And, it wasn't necessarily completely inhumane because they plied them until they fell asleep, and then they died in their sleep.
Well, and this is also not like it's happening today. It's a very long time ago.
Right. This is a long time ago.
It's a very long time ago in a very different culture. So it's very difficult to put like our 21st century cultural beliefs onto American cultural beliefs onto other people. I feel like it's very difficult to do that because...
So then the 3 kids, one was La Doncella, a 15-year-old girl. She actually had a bacterial infection in her lungs. I don't know if it was fatal. They didn't elaborate. She also had very elaborately braided hair with tons and tons of tiny braids. They said she was possibly a sun virgin, which is a group of girls who were selected at a young age to serve the sun god. Much like Vestal virgins, that kind of thing. And her half-sister was also buried with her. She was La Niña del Rayo, called that because she was partially damaged post-mortem by a lightning strike. It was not, when she was...
What are the chances?
Right. But she was 6 years old, and she actually had evidence of her head having been part of purposeful cranial deformation. So her head was elongated, because that was something that Incans practiced too.
Okay.
And there was a little boy. He actually makes me the most sad. He's called El Nino. He was 7 years old, and he was not as well taken care of as the girls.
Oh, so he was like a poor...
Possibly. They believe so, yes. And he was so tightly wrapped that his ribs and pelvis were dislocated. He actually may have died of suffocation because he was tied very tightly together. And he had vomit and blood found on his clothes. He had like nits in his hair. He just was not well taken care of. And he was not healthy either. And I'm wondering... I wonder, this is just Lindsay wondering, not a professional in this field, if maybe he was a last-minute addition or replacement.
Or if they knew that the girl was sick as well, add another child to make sacrifice larger. Because if she was sick, because I guess...
Or things got worse.
Yeah.
And so they thought, we need to make these sacrifices for this purpose. It's getting worse, let's add a child.
Right.
So that they didn't go through the same process that the girls would have.
Right.
I don't know, just speculation. I don't know how much more I have on mummies. I think I have a few little examples from across the world.
Okay, give us those. I had just a few. I do have it's weird. I think it's weird. This whole thing is weird. So... One of the reasons that we don't have as many mummies around as we used to is because the Victorians like to eat them.
Oh, that was my next subject is the Guanche people they're the indigenous people of the Canary Islands, which is off the east coast of Africa. It's now a Spanish territory.
Yeah, Tenerife, that's like a party city.
Yeah, and they kind of did the same. Yeah, Tenerife. And most of them were found in Tenerife. And they basically mummified a lot of their people. And the number of wrappings were related to your social status. So kings were wrapped in 15 animal skins. Mm-hmm. And people of lower status were wrapped in less.
Okay.
But they were actually, at least by medieval Spanish numbers, they found at least 1,000 mummies in Tenerife. But only 20 complete mummies have been found today. And they believe that it was basically lost to mumia.
Yeah, so when I say they like to eat mummies, I don't mean they were just chowing down on a mummy. What I mean is
pulverized mummies.
Yeah, they would pulverize them and drink it in
humans.
Water.
Dead bodies.
So
dead human bodies.
Victorian England, while you're thinking Queen Victoria is in her wedding dress, living the life, they're also literally drinking.
So cannibals.
They're cannibals. They're literally crushing up human bodies and drinking them.
Yep.
Because it was supposed to make you healthier and stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Cannibalism makes people healthier. That's what I've learned over the years.
So you would think that might have died in the Victorian era. But you would be wrong if you thought that. Because was it 2016? It wasn't very long ago. They opened a sarcophagus in Egypt. And there were 4 mummies inside, 4 mummies inside. And it was filled with this black water goo substance. And there was a petition circulating to let people drink the mummy water. The 2016, the year of our Lord, 2016,
let's drink mummy juice.
When I got on this change.org petition, when I found it, so I could talk to Lindsay about it.
Did you sign it?
No, but someone had signed it 10 minutes ago, remember? So there's thousands of signatures on this petition to drink the water. And clearly these are mummies from a very long time ago.
Which is probably partially liquefied human remains.
Yeah, so it's got decomposition in it. I would say it's not going to be if you died and got put in a sarcophagus and just liquefied. That's not what it is. It's not like that. But it is definitely human remains in what is probably sewage. It's probably sewage. So it's human remains floating in sewage that people want to drink.
I think you should can it in one of those big monster cans, call it mummy juice, and market it as an energy drink.
Honestly,
I think it tastes just as good.
If you're stupid enough to want to drink sewer water, I think they should let you.
That's true.
Survival of the fittest. Honestly, what if
you probably have some ancient bacteria in there?
What if it turned him into Spider-Man?
Mummy man?
So I would never. I'll do a lot of things.
I would never.
But I would never. Especially, for me, the sewer is worse than the 4,000-year-old body.
Yeah.
For me, it's the sewer. I
don't know. The sewage water that a dead body has been sitting in
for God knows how long.
For thousands of years.
Well, the sewer could be fresher than that.
Still, I don't care how fresh the sewage is and how long the body's been in it.
You don't care how fresh it is? What if it was last week? That's real sewer.
What, and 4,000-year-old sewage is better?
No, but yeah, no, but also
so I don't care how old the sewage is. I'm not drinking 4,000-year-old. If somebody said, would you rather have week-old sewage or 4,000-year-old sewage?
I would pick 4,000.
I'd be like, shoot me.
Well, I did that too, but I think I would have, if I had to pick, I would pick 4,000 because at least you don't know what it is.
I think I would pick more recent. Because at least I have immunity to the bacteria found. I'm familiar with it.
I could only hope that it would kill me faster if it was 4,000 years old.
Well, if your goal is to die faster, but
if I'm drinking sewage, that has
there could be smallpox in that sewage, Hope.
There could be cholera in it. There could be cholera in the new sewage.
Well, yeah, there could be cholera in any sewage.
True.
But I'm saying in the new sewage, you're not going to find smallpox.
Oh, because we're not vaccinated against smallpox, are we?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, that'd be my luck. I'd get smallpox. wait, can you drink? We're not virologists, so I'm like, can you drink smallpox? Like,
drink smallpox?
We're not virologists.
It is a contagious disease. I just don't know how it's spread.
I feel like
drinking it kind of covers everything, though.
That's true. I mean, yeah. So just know while you're sitting there, whatever you're doing while you're listening to this podcast, just know that out there, thousands of people have signed a petition to drink mummy water.
And sewage and potentially get smallpox.
Yes. So just know that that's happening in the world today. So.
Anyways.
I'm never going to get over this.
So I did talk a little bit about the Aboriginal Australians.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned them. They also have a history of mummification. They believe that the Torres Strait Islanders are the ones who originated it because they were a lot more sedentary than the mainland Aboriginal Australians. You would
need to be in a...
Because you're on an island, you can't go very far.
Where are you going to go? Nowhere.
As opposed to the outback,
which
is, people get lost there all the time. But they basically, and this is something that happens, I think it's the Kabayan mummies, is they put it on a platform and let it dry in the sun.
Oh.
Or they smoke it on a platform in a seated position, I believe. Yes, they set it down in like a seated position and smoke it or let it dry in the sun like that. And then they kind of dress it up and mourn it, and then they bury it. And the Kabayan mummies in the Philippines...
are those the Cliff Mummies?
Yes.
I've seen
and they actually begin the mummification process before you die. So you drink like a very salty drink. So you drink salt.
Like on your deathbed?
Yeah, essentially. And then they were basically set into a seated position and smoked. And they would also smoke your internal organs by blowing into your mouth with smoke. And then they were put into mountain caves.
Like, side note here, so like as a culture who's never done this, it sounds like it sounds it's not horrifying, but like it sounds scary to me. So like I can't even go in the room with a coffin at a funeral. It literally like gives me just like...
Well, the Guanche or Guanche people of the Canary Islands, the mummification specialists were basically considered unclean. They could be male or female. Yeah. So men or women could be unclean.
Equal opportunity jobs.
Yeah, equal opportunity untouchableness.
Well, I don't know, like, so there's such a stigma, I guess, around just like dead bodies and everything in the United States. So just hearing about these people who it's like right there and they're okay, they're okay with that. It's right there by their house, like doing its... I would just die. I would just die. Like,
the last thing
scare me.
The last thing I want to talk about is basically the practice of self-mummification.
Oh yeah, this scares me too.
So this happens with Mahayana Buddhists. It's especially well known in Japan, and they use Japanese words for the process. So the Soku Shinbutsu are ascetic monks, and they practice Nyujo. And it's a process, at least in Japan, it takes 3,000 days.
Which is...
You kind of...
Years.
You go into the mountains, and you switch your diet to pine needles, resins, and seeds, all to eliminate fat from the body. Then you kind of increase your rates of fasting until you start to go into starvation mode. And you reduce after that you reduce your liquid intake to dehydrate your body and shrink your organs. And you continue to meditate essentially until you die of dehydration and starvation. And your body is naturally preserved upon your death because you've already dehydrated the...
everything out of it.
Everything out of your body, essentially.
And if it works, that you're meant to be like quite holy.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's something that thousands have tried, but not many have achieved. But some have.
Yeah, only like less than 10, right? Like it's not a big
It's not a lot.
Yeah, it's that, like, I can't imagine the self-discipline that
that's the thing I think I found the most interesting when I read that self-mummification was a thing.
That's the self-discipline that would take is astounding. I did have a couple of discussion questions. Wow. Okay, so first, I was just going to talk about how do you feel about the display of things like mummies and bog bodies and all that in museums? So clearly, we're not the type of museum that would have something like this.
No.
No, we're not, or no, you don't like it?
No, we're not the type of museum that would have something like this. I am torn because in some ways, with accidental mummies, you're not... Let's talk about removing them first.
Right. So so basically it's a moral conundrum for me as well. But like you're moving these bodies out of the place that they were buried.
But here's the thing.
If they're mummies.
If they're purposeful mummies, but then accidental mummies, they just died where they fell and got mummified.
Right. But so like the pharaohs, for instance, you are moving them from their grave. You're digging up their grave and moving them to put them on display. A bog body...
We're not really sure a whole lot about bog bodies.
Because you can't just, like, find one and decide this must have been human sacrifice.
Well, because the Soviet, the ones found in the Soviet Union, I would assume it was accidental because they were probably shot during war.
Or, like, the Ice Maiden in Siberia. So...
Well, no, the Ice Maiden was buried.
Okay, so...
She was mummified accidentally, but her burial was purposeful. But if you're talking about, they think Ötzi, the Iceman may have not been...
is he displayed somewhere, or is he...
I don't remember. In the Canadian Iceman, it never mentioned whether it was accidental. He had a bunch of stuff with them.
So probably.
So it's assumed that he died of hypothermia, and the people who either found him or were with him... just kind of buried him in where he was because they were nomadic. You can't take him with you.
Right. So, like, for me, I'm torn because while I think that the study is very interesting of it, I wouldn't want you to take my grandma out of her grave. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
That's someone put them there with the intention that they would stay there forever.
Yeah. In certain cases.
Yeah. And especially in the cases where they were buried there.
So for me, I also have mixed feelings about it because I think in places like classical archaeologists might work, you can put the protections in to keep people from going and looting.
Right.
You can preserve them where they lie. But in Peru, and I'm assuming in Chile as well, but when I was in Peru, I watched people loot the site.
Right.
That we were working on. They were using it as a rock quarry, and they came in with bulldozers and everything when we weren't there at night, and more of the site was lost.
Right.
Every morning.
Yeah.
So in that case, I think you need to remove the body, and I think it's better because the museum is acting as a protector. But of course, as well, a lot of those bodies, like the Lady of Sao, is being preserved in a Peruvian museum.
Right.
She has not been taken away by the British Museum.
Right. And we can say, like, clearly we mentioned the British Museum because they got a lot of stuff that's not theirs.
That they won't give back.
And they will not give it back.
Yeah. They've been asked, and they will not.
Which is a large part of it. I know that the British Museum does have mummies. I feel like I've seen the mummies at the British Museum. And I feel like... I don't feel like it's gaudy or anything like it. It's as respectful as you can be in a museum that's the size of the British Museum, right? Yeah,
I think the Lady of Sao's museum was very respectful.
I think what you said was probably more respectful than what the British Museum does. I feel like it's an open room. I haven't been there in years, but I feel like it was just a room. Like, you're in like a room with other stuff all around. But
I felt like it was very austere and very, like, it honored her tomb. It wasn't, like you said, gaudy. And I feel like in that case because that's kind of what the British Museum
That's what
does.
They claim.
They're like, oh, we're just protecting it
from care of
these savages who would loot it.
Yeah, or you don't have the necessary things to take care of it.
And then when they build the necessary things, they say, we already
have it. Like, we might as well just leave it here.
Yeah, because Greece did that, right?
Yeah, Greece built the Acropolis Museum specifically to house the artifacts from the Acropolis
that the British stole.
They are called the Elgin Marbles in England. They were stolen by Lord Elgin, sandblasted, and put on display. And they're actually, if you ever find yourself in the Acropolis Museum on the second floor, it goes all the way around on the inside and the outside. The outside is meant to be like the outer friezes on the Parthenon, and they have blocks where the missing ones are that say, this is what it should be. It is in the British Museum, and they won't give it back to me.
Yeah.
So,
in that case, there are unethical museum practices. Yes. Whereas I think in other cases, museums are being the ethical ones to try to protect what they have. If the Lady of Sal's tomb had been out there, it would have been they would have taken all of that gold.
Yeah.
And she would have been stripped of everything.
Yeah. And I think that you can, and I don't mean this in a negative way, because I think that, I think what archaeologists do is fantastic, but in a way they are grave robbers. We all are, right? All of us that go in to, I've never done anything like that because I'm pretty boring, but then you go into someone's tomb, because that's what the pyramids are, right? They're tombs. Just ask Howard Carter. That's the guy that found Tut, right? Howard Carter, is that his name?
I don't remember.
I think that's
it's not in my
name.
notes. I don't remember what's not in my notes.
I think that's his name. But it is, they were meant to be there forever. And you go in and you take the stuff. And I'm not saying that because a lot of times now people are much more careful, and you have to have permission by a country to work there. You can't just go in. Sometimes I think it's just really sad that,
something that was interesting that was done with, I believe it was the Canadian Iceman. They basically found him, and they took him in for scientific research and study, and they did DNA tests, and they found recent ancestor people.
Just wondering if they could do
descendants,
familial DNA. Yeah,
they found descendants, and they actually, if I recall correctly, it was this one. After they completed all of their scientific research and did what they wanted, they repatriated it back to the tribe he would have belonged to for burial. So
that's amazing.
He was brought out. And I thought that was a good compromise. I know in some cases doing stuff to bodies would be considered desecrating bodies. And I know that can be a really touchy subject as far as certain religions or certain groups.
You have to wonder if there's a statute of limitations on stuff like that.
Yeah, that was 300 to 500 years ago.
Yeah, so in a way you have to wonder, is there a statute of limitations if it's been this long?
Yeah. But essentially, I think they tried to do the best with the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Maybe it was desecrating a body. That's the point of argument, but basically everybody got what they wanted, even if some things were done that maybe the other group didn't want to happen.
Yeah.
Because they were able to do all the research that they could and gave it back for burial.
I think it's such just a moral conundrum because you do want to learn all that you can, especially if you are interested in history and everything else. You want them to learn as much as they can about the past.
Yeah.
Especially because you know how much one discovery can change everything. So you're of course you want that, but at the same time you're it's hard, isn't it? Because they're people.
Yeah.
And I think that's what because I think that, not that you forget that a mummy is a person, but when we're talking about whoever's mummy or what, we're not talking about that person, right? We're talking about the thing that we're looking at. And I think that sometimes people just sort of gloss over the fact that that's a real person that had a real life that no one ever.
But at the same time, and I think I'm a little bit more callous than other people.
I think that about myself most of the time too. So,
I think if I didn't know that person in life, I wouldn't care if somebody dug up a relative of mine.
I think within a little bit of removal. Because, I don't think, 1915 isn't really that long ago, But, if we're talking, my relatives that settled Jamestown, I don't care.
Go ahead.
I don't care about that. Have at it. If it's going to help with whatever you're doing, sure, go ahead, have at it. Or, if we're talking, murder victim last year, yes, exhume. But
I wouldn't, and I guess I would, removal is probably okay, because I wouldn't want to see, my mom or grandma distressed. It wouldn't bother me personally, but their distress would bother me.
So if we're talking, pre-Civil War, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, there's definitely, at this point, no one alive that could possibly know anyone that knows anyone. Like, we're very far removed from
And
it.
I wouldn't even mind if they didn't get my permission or anything. What I would be more interested is to learn more about them.
Yeah.
I would even if I found out they dug up one of my ancestors without my permission, I'd be like, please research them. I want to know more about where I came from.
I want to know, like, what they're a part of, that it would be interesting to you to exhume their
dig 'em up.
bodies. Like, what happened?
Yeah.
I don't know if... Well, I'll tell you about that later. But yeah, I think that's really interesting.
Well, and one of the things that happened, at least with the Canadian Iceman, was when they dug him up for DNA and they were able to find ancestors in the region, they were excited. They were like, this shows we've been here this long.
Yeah, I mean, that is really cool. Can you imagine, like, if you thought that your family had only been somewhere for 100 years, but come to find out it's been 500 or more?
Even if you've been told, like, you've been here for 500 years, all of a sudden somebody says, here's DNA proof.
That you've been here.
That you've been here.
I think that is really
and that
cool.
you have these deep ties to the land here.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel like that situation, at least as far as I could read,
it
was
seems like
optimal.
Yeah.
The people benefited from the research. They got confirmation that they'd been here that long, but they also got the body back after the research was done to be buried in a respectful way. And like I said, I know desecrating the body is sensitive for some, but at least in this situation, it seemed like they were more interested in knowing more about their ancestry and their ancestor than they were concerned about desecrating the body. And that might have just been a religious belief.
Is this First Nations people in Canada?
Yes, First Nations people in Canada. I don't remember which group. They did have it written down. I just didn't write it down myself because this was getting to the end of my notes and I was getting a lot sloppier about what I wrote down.
That's really cool. It's really cool, though, that happened.
But when I read about that situation, I'm sure some people were unhappy as well. I just thought, that seems like the best possible outcome.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a way to make everyone happy in situations like that. But I do think that does sound like a good outcome.
But maybe if that happened with the pharaohs of Egypt, you get all the photographs you wanted. You could do 3D modeling these days.
Yeah. And it can't be that easy to break into a pyramid today. Like...
Yeah.
Or a tomb in general. Like, it can't be that easy to break into.
For a lot of them, they only got broken into like 4,000 years later.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're doing something right to keep it closed.
Yeah.
But then you can put them back.
Yeah. Because, I don't know. For me personally, I enjoy, like, learning, but I particularly, and this is 100% personal preference, I don't particularly like to look at mummies or anything else. Just makes it, like I said, like, knowing that it's a person, and bones don't bother me, but mummies aren't bones. So having, like, characteristics of a person just makes me think it's going to sit up or something.
Well, and to me,
personally, just, it's not for me.
It's the 20s. Okay.
It is the 20s.
It is the 20s. It's a new dawn, and we can make replicas of anything and everything.
Oh yeah, 3D printing, literally anything.
Yeah, I mean, you could make a replica in your own home if you had like a $300 3D printer.
Yeah.
You know, I just think that it could be, and we have 3D imaging, and I think we have the tools to be able to display in museums with technology.
Oh, yeah.
Rather than keeping
people.
Yeah.
Because for me, the whole thing is, like, they are people.
Unless you run into situations like the Lady of Sao, where if you do bury her back in her tomb, she's just going to get, like, where the museum is actually acting as her tomb and as her protection.
And there's a lot of museums that are doing that. And that's great. Like, it's great when museums are doing that. And those, a lot of times, are newer museums.
Yeah, this was actually a much newer museum.
So is the Acropolis Museum in Greece. Like, they're newer museums that are purpose-built to house priceless things. Yeah. And a lot of the museums that we see a lot of trouble coming from are very old, very established. If you are an established museum that has been around for a couple hundred years, there's a chance that you have things from your colonial days. Yeah. So when you were a colonizer, there's also a chance that you thought something was cool and you grabbed it, you took it, and you shouldn't have. Yeah. That happens. Or someone else someone grabbed it and it eventually came to you.
Yeah. And I think in the U.S. we have Nagpra, which is the Native American Graves Repatriation Act. So if you have funeral objects or bodies, it's kind of a law and
that you give
a legality that you have to give it back to the tribe.
Yeah, to the tribe. So they can display or bury or whatever they want.
They choose to do with it what they want, or they are the ones to give you permission to keep it.
Yeah.
As a tribe, if they have current ancestors, because there are some tribes that died out completely. And I think that's a good step in the right direction.
Yeah, I do too.
It's not perfect, and it has nothing to do with international matters, but I think it is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and you have to hope that if America does it, at least one other person will be like, that seems like a good idea. Let's do it.
I don't know if any other country does it.
Because realistically, America does not have the greatest track record. So
I think,
like, if they can do it, anybody can do it.
Yeah, I don't think we stole as many artifacts from other countries, but we also didn't colonize a whole lot of other places. We were a colony.
We just sort of stole a lot of artifacts from the native peoples of our country, and
right, but we didn't really colonize Africa.
No, we didn't go off to colonize.
Southeast Asia.
America can say, at least for itself, they didn't colonize very much because they were so worried. Because during that time, they were so worried about building their own country up to be.
Well, because we were already the colony that was colonized.
Yeah, and by the time we weren't a colony anymore, we were like, well, now we got to be a superpower. Bye.
Yeah, it's just, we were already a colony, kind of like, Australia didn't really colonize anything because they were a colony.
Canada didn't colonize.
Yeah, because they were a colony.
Yeah, so if you're a colony, if you're like...
But England colonized everything.
The empire where the sun never sets.
Yeah, India, Southeast Asia, South America, North America.
The South Pacific.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of...
Antarctica.
I don't think they technically colonized Antarctica.
No,
I think the Russians got it.
I bet there's a lot of British scientists working down there now, though. Sorry, we'll cut that out too.
Yeah.
No need to be petty. All right, well, I guess that's all that I have for mummies. What about you?
All right. We could talk about mummies all day.
We could.
We have been talking about mummies all day.
And pausing for loud music.
Yes, that's true.
All right, well, I guess we'll be back next week, guys.
Bye.
Bye.